Hi there. This video is for Mackenzie and Eli and Emily and Carly and Jason and Anna, my grandchildren. And since we're not going to get to see you guys for a while, we had planned to be able to travel a little bit. And you were going to come see us and we were going to go see you, but I guess we're not going to get to do that. So I thought I'd read you a story. So I'm going to read a story, part of a story, and it's called The Cricket in Times Square. A mouse was looking at Mario. The mouse's name was Tucker, and he was sitting in the opening of an abandoned drain pipe in the subway station at Times Square. The drain pipe was his home. Back a few feet in the wall, it opened out into a pocket that Tucker had filled with bits of paper and shreds of cloth that he had collected. And when he wasn't collecting, scrounging is what he called it, or sleeping, he liked to sit at the opening of the drain pipe and just watch the world go by, at least as much of the world as hurried through the Times Square subway station. Tucker finished his last few crumbs of cookie, Laura Doone shortbread he had found earlier in the evening. He licked off his whiskers. Such a pity, he decided. Every Saturday night now, for almost a year, he had watched Mario tending his father's newsstand. On weekdays, of course, the boy had to get to bed early because he had to go to school. But over the weekends, Papa Bellini let him take his part in helping out at the family business. Far into the night, Mario waited. Papa hoped that by staying open as late as possible, his newsstand might get some new business, some of the business that would otherwise have gone to the larger stands. But there just wasn't much business tonight. The poor kid might as well go home, murmured Tucker Mouse to himself. He looked around the station. The bustle of the day had long since subsided, and even the nighttime crowds returning home from the theaters and movies had vanished. Now and then a person or two would come down one of the many stairs that led down from the streets above and dart through the station, but at this hour everyone was in a hurry to get home and go to bed. On the lower level of the trains were running much less often. There would be a long stretch of silence, then the mounting roar of a string of cars approaching. Times Square, the conductors would say. Then a pause while it let off old passengers and took on a few new ones, and finally the rush of sound as it disappeared down the dark tunnel. And the hush fell again. There was an emptiness in the air. The whole station seemed to be waiting for the crowds of people that it needed. Tucker Mouse looked back over at Mario. He was sitting on the three-legged stool behind the counter of the newsstand. In front of him were all the magazines and newspapers where they were displayed neatly, well, as neatly as he knew how to make them. Papa Bellini had made the newsstand himself many years ago. The space inside was big enough for Mario, but Mama and Papa were kind of cramped when they took their turn. The shelf ran along one side, and on it were the little second-hand radio, a box of Kleenexes for Mama's hay fever, a box of kitchen matches for lighting Papa's pipe, a cash register for money, which there wasn't much of, and an alarm clock. Well, for no good reason at all. The cash register had one drawer, which had always been open. It had gotten stuck one time with all the money that the Bellinis had in the whole world inside of it, so Papa decided it would be safer never to shut it again. When the stand was closed for the night, the money that was left there was to start off for the next day. It was safe because Papa had also made a big wooden cover with a lock that fitted over the whole thing. Mario had been listening to the radio. He had switched it off. Way down the tracks he could see the lights of the shuttle train coming towards him. On the level of the station where the newsstand was, the only tracks that were there were ones that the shuttle ran on. That was a short train that went back and forth from the Times Square station to the Grand Central station, taking people from the subways on the east side of New York to the subways on the west side of New York City. Mario knew most of the conductors on the shuttle. They all liked him, and they came over in between their trips. The train screeched to a halt beside the newsstand, blowing a gust of hot air into the air in front of it. Only 9 or 10 people got out. Tucker watched anxiously to see if any of them stopped to buy a paper. "All late papers," shouted Mario as they hurried by. "Magazines!" No one stopped. Hardly anyone even looked at him. Mario sank back on his stool. All evening long he had only sold 15 papers and 4 magazines. In the drain pipe, Tucker Mouse also had been keeping count. He sighed and scratched his ear. Mario's friend Paul, the conductor of the shuttle, came over to the stand. "Any luck?" he asked. "No," said Mario. "Maybe the next train." "There's going to be less and less until morning," said Paul. Mario rested his chin on the palm of his hand. "I just can't understand it," he said. "It's Saturday night, too. Even the Sunday papers aren't going very well." Paul leaned up against the newsstand. "You're up awfully late tonight," he said. "Well, I can sleep on Sundays," said Mario. "Besides, school's out now. Mom and Papa are picking me up on the way home. They went to visit some friends. Saturday's the only chance they have." Over a loudspeaker came a voice saying, "Next train for Grand Central, track 2. "Good night, Mario," Paul said as he started off towards the train. Here's a picture of Mario at the newsstand. Then Paul stopped, reached in his pocket, flipped a $50 over the counter. Mario caught the big coin. "I'll take a Sunday Times," Paul said. He picked up the newspaper. "Hey, wait," Mario called after him. "It's only 25 cents. You've got a quarter coming." But Paul was already in the car. The door slid closed. He smiled and waved through the window. With a lurch, the train moved off, its lights glimmering away through the darkness. Tucker Mouse smiled too. He liked Paul. In fact, he liked anybody who was nice to Mario. But it was late now. It's time to crawl back into his comfortable niche in the wall and go to sleep. Even a mouse who lives in the subway station at Times Square has to sleep sometimes. And Tucker had a big day. He had a big day planned for tomorrow too, collecting things for his house, snapping up bits of food that fell from the lunch counters all over the station. He was just about to turn into the drain pipe when he heard a sound. It was a strange sound. Now Tucker Mouse had heard almost all the sounds that can be heard in New York City. He had heard the rumble of the subway trains that shriek in their iron wheels and the sound that they make when they go around a corner. From above, through the iron grills on the streets, he had heard the thrumming of the rubber tires and the automobiles and the hooting of their horns and the howling of their brakes. And, well, he had heard the babble of the voices when the station was full of human beings and the barking of the dogs that some of them had on the leashes. And he'd heard the birds and the pigeons and the New York and the cats and the rats and even the high purring airplanes high above the city. Tucker had heard. But in all his days, and in all his journeys through the greatest city in the world, Tucker had never heard a sound quite like this sound.